Cold killed more soldiers in World War II than bullets ever could. Not in one dramatic moment, not with explosions or headlines, but slowly, quietly, in the dark. And the most effective defense against it wasn't a weapon, it was a tube of canvas. This is the story of the World War II shelter tube, a deceptively simple piece of gear that turned human body heat into a survival system. No electricity, no fuel, no modern insulation, just physics, discipline, and hard-earned battlefield knowledge. And for thousands of soldiers, it meant the difference between waking up or never waking up again. Why cold was a bigger enemy than gunfire? By the early years of World War II, armies had learned a brutal lesson. You could have the best rifles, the fastest tanks, and total air superiority, but if your soldiers froze, none of that mattered. How soldiers actually used it in the field was, well, a bit different than you might think. The shelter tube was rarely used alone. Smart soldiers combined it with whatever they had on hand. Dry leaves, straw, pine branches, even spare uniforms. Really, anything placed beneath the body reduced ground heat loss, which was often the biggest killer out there. The earth, you see, sucked warmth away faster than the air ever could. The tube went over everything. Boots stayed on to prevent frostbite, and weapons were kept inside to stop metal from freezing. Breathing was carefully controlled to reduce moisture build-up, which could turn deadly if it condensed and froze. And here's the detail most people miss. Soldiers never sealed it completely. There was always a tiny ventilation gap left open, just enough to prevent carbon dioxide build-up and moisture saturation. Too tight and condensation-soaked uniforms. Too loose and heat escaped. It was, well, a balancing act learned the hard way. Why was it especially important at night? Daytime cold was manageable. You moved, you worked, you stayed alive. But night was different. Temperatures dropped, winds picked up, and exhaustion made bad decisions more likely. Many cold weather deaths happened during rest periods, not combat. The shelter tube turned those dangerous hours into survivable ones. It allowed soldiers to rest without lighting fires that could give away their position. That alone made it invaluable in forward areas. Silent warmth was tactical warmth. Lessons learned from failure, well, they tend to stick with you. The shelter tube didn't appear overnight, you know. Early winter campaigns were frankly disasters. Units underestimated the cold, just didn't see it coming. Soldiers slept exposed, out there in the elements. Frostbite rates, they skyrocketed. In some cases, more men were evacuated for cold injuries than for combat wounds. Armies adapted fast, or, well, they paid the price. By mid-war, cold weather doctrine had evolved, no question about it. Shelter techniques were taught, gear was re-evaluated. The tube method spread because it worked, not because it looked good on paper. It was ugly, cramped, miserable, and honestly, incredibly effective. Why does this matter beyond World War II? Well, this isn't just a history lesson, not by a long shot. The shelter tube principle still matters today. Modern survival experts, they teach the same fundamentals. Block wind, reduce space, trap heat, insulate from the ground, control moisture, high-tech sleeping bags and bivy sacks. They're direct descendants of this idea. The materials changed, sure, but the logic didn't. If you stripped modern survival gear down to its core, you'd end up right back here, a human inside a tube, fighting heat loss with nothing but smart design. The human factor that made it work, gear alone didn't save lives. Discipline did. Soldiers had to change wet clothes before entering the tube. They had to eat enough calories. They had to recognize early signs of cold injury and act fast. Those who ignored the rules suffered. Those who respected the system survived. The shelter tube wasn't magic. It was a tool. And like all tools, it only worked when used correctly. Why does this story get overlooked? Well, it's not flashy. There's no hero charge, no dramatic last stand. But you know it saved lives quietly, repeatedly. In places history rarely lingers. Wars aren't won by comfort, but they're lost without survival. And the shelter tube kept soldiers alive long enough to keep fighting. That's worth remembering. So, what does this teach us about before modern survival? Before modern technology, survival depended on understanding the environment, not overpowering it. The shelter tube is a perfect example of pre-modern thinking applied under modern pressure. No batteries, no fuel, just knowledge, discipline, and a piece of cloth used the right way. That's the heart of survival history, and it's exactly why these stories still matter. Final thoughts and a quick call to action. The next time you see a simple piece of fabric, remember this. In the frozen nights of World War II, canvas shaped like a tube stood between life and death. If stories like this matter to you, stories of forgotten skills, hard-earned knowledge, and survival before modern shortcuts, make sure you're part of this channel. Like the video if you learned something new. Share it with someone who loves real history. And subscribe to Before Modern Times for more true survival stories that history almost forgot. Because, you know, the past still has lessons worth listening to.